Welcome to this brief introduction to functions. So, the ability to write functions is really what separates a program like R from many other statistical packages which rely on kind of canned or pre-written operations. And before we kind of really launch into data analysis, it's going to be important to get a sense of kind of how functions work in R. So we're going to talk briefly about just three things. What is a function? What are a few examples of familiar functions? And it turns out that we've really been using functions kind of all along. And so just kind of realizing this is an important thing. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about how to write your own functions. And I'll give two examples of some just really easy, really simple functions that we can create ourselves. So to start, we have this question, what is a function? And just in its simplest sense, a function is just something that takes some kind of input and then does something with the input and returns some sort of output. So you can think of it kind of as like a converter box or something like that. And it turns out that we've been using functions already a ton in R. So functions like sum, this SD gives us the standard deviation of a vector. We can find the mean or max, and there are just tons and tons more that we've already been using. So functions are kind of ubiquitous in R. Now, when we're talking about writing our own functions, they're just going to be a couple steps, and this will be clearer once we open up R. But to give you a preview, the things you're going to want to do are just going to be to give your function some kind of name so that you can keep track of what it is that your function is doing. And then you want to specify the inputs to the function in parentheses. So in the last examples, these are functions that all act on vectors, for example. And then we need to specify what the function actually does, or what happens inside this sort of black box in curly brackets. And then we just need to tell R what we actually want returned to a user with this return function. So if this seems really opaque, don't worry. It'll be clearer here as we look at R. So first, let's just talk about a few familiar examples. So here, if we have some vector called vec, we can think of this vector as being just an input that we can pass to a function, which then does something with the vector and gives us some output. So if we ask R for some vec, really what we're saying is we're going to cram this vec into this black box, which we're calling sum, and the black box is going to do some manipulations with it, and then we'll crank out a result, which is just this number 10, which is just the sum of those values. Similarly, SD is just another black box that we can toss this input vec into, and we get this standard deviation. Now, when we're talking about writing our own functions, this is going to be pretty simple. So first, we said we're going to need to give our function a name. So let's say that we've got the goal of doing something really simple. Let's say that we're going to start with a vector. So start with a vector, and then we're going to ask, is the first value of that vector exactly equal to 5? So this seems like kind of a silly function, but this will help us get a sense of how we actually write these in R. So we're going to need to give our function a name. So let's call it 5.check. This name will kind of help us keep track of the fact that our vector does this thing, which is to just check whether the first value is 5. And then next we can go ahead and define it. So we're going to start with the name that we've chosen, and we're going to say 5.check equals, and then because we're defining a function, we need to say function here, and then inside these parentheses we need to specify what the input to the function is going to be. So because we want this function to act on vectors, I'm just going to put the word vector in here. So vector is just sort of a placeholder where we keep track of the name of the thing that we're putting into the function. So I could have easily instead put in something like x or x1 or something like that. So here I'm going to put in the word vector. And then the next bit that we need is to specify what we want the vector to do inside of these parentheses. So here, the thing that I want the function to do is to take this object that has been passed to it, called vector, and look at the first element. So remember that we use the brackets to do that, and then test whether that first value is exactly equal to 5. And so when the function actually does this, when it carries out this step, the result is going to be some value which is either true or false. Remember, we saw that from the section on logical tests. And I want R to return that value, either true or false. So once I've specified all of these things, if I just highlight them and then execute all 3 of these lines, we can see that R now has saved my function up here under this tab called Functions. And now, when I say 5.check, I can put a vector into these parentheses, and hopefully, if everything's working right, it'll check whether the first value is equal to 5. So remember that we saved this vector up here called vec. So I can check to make sure that it's there by typing vec, and I see that it is. So now, hopefully, when I put vec inside of these parentheses, I'll see the value false because the first value is not equal to 5. And when I run that, I see, okay, good, this is working the way that I'm hoping it does. Now, we can continue to check it by defining a new vector that actually does start with 5. So let's do that, and then try tossing that into our function. And when we evaluate this, we see, okay, good, it is evaluated to being true. So this is an example of a really simple function that we've created that just takes an input, which is something that we've just called vector here, and asks whether its first value is 5, and then returns either a yes or a no. Now, as we go along, we'll define functions that are a lot more complicated and do much more exciting things, but to first start, it's important just to try something simple, and remember that these are going to be the steps that we go through, and hopefully when we're done with them, we have a nice function to work with that we've composed ourselves.